I'm gonna remarry your sister who inherited the entire estate. Poor folks like you should just disappear.
My husband said with a smirk. Next to my husband was my sister, leaning on him conspicuously.
Sis, it must feel miserable to have both your inheritance and your husband taken by me. Oh, it feels so good to take what's yours. We're going to live happily ever after with Dad's estate.
My sister said with a blissful expression.
You're such a fool to renounce such a huge inheritance from your father.
My husband sneered alongside my sister. Their laughter filled with scorn made the anger in me boil to the core. Are these people even human? To me, blinded by greed, they seemed more like monsters. Indeed, I had renounced my recently deceased father's inheritance. Immediately after, my husband left me to switch over to my sister, who received the full inheritance. With a heavy sigh, I said to them, "All right, let's get a divorce."
Wow, you're surprisingly obedient. I thought you'd cling and beg not to divorce.
My husband said, taken aback, but there was no love left in me for him. Why wouldn't I want a divorce? I signed the divorce papers he brought and handed them to him.
Now we can get divorced. I'm going to start a new life as a rich man.
Thanks, sis. A twice divorced woman like you probably won't remarry, but cheer up.
They both laughed heartily. So we divorced, and 3 months passed. That's when the incessant calls from my ex-husband began. I looked at the overwhelming call log from him and couldn't help but smile. You've realized it too late. My name is Lori. I'm 35 years old. I was married to Jake, 3 years older than me, for 10 years, and we lived as a working couple. We have a son who is 8 years old. His name is Max. Max used to be clingy when he was younger, but lately, he's become more independent and can mostly take care of himself. Jake did help with parenting for about a year after Max was born. He was quite active in helping back then, enough to be called a hands-on dad. However, as Max grew past 1 year, Jake gradually became less cooperative and eventually stopped doing anything. Max was a child who cried a lot at night, even past 1 year after he was born.
Shut up! Why does he always cry at night? Is something wrong with him?
Jake yelled, clearly frustrated. Don't say such horrible things. It's not unusual for kids to cry at night for about 1.5 years. Don't call your own child weird. I snapped back, angered by his harsh words.
Whatever. I can't find Max cute at all. I could have loved him if he didn't cry so much. He's always crying. Shut him up already, it's affecting my work tomorrow.
Jake seemed to have been enduring Max's night crying. The lack of cooperation in parenting seemed to stem from this issue. I struggled alone to soothe Max to sleep, rocking him in my arms or sometimes driving him around. Jake always looked at me with a tired expression as I struggled alone.
You know, looking at you pisses me off. It's like you're showing off doing all the parenting alone. It's annoying.
I sometimes fought back against such insults from Jake, but it often led to arguments which were too much for me to handle, so I mostly stayed silent. Even after that, I single-handedly managed the household and parenting. When Max turned 2, I sent him to daycare and returned to work. Even after I resumed work, Jake didn't help with housework or parenting, so I continued to handle everything on my own. I asked for help, but he always said, "I'm tired," and relaxed on the sofa. I knew it would be better to rely on others, but I didn't ask my parents for help. My mother passed away when I was young, and I didn't want to burden my elderly father. I have only one sister, but we've never gotten along. Rather, she has always disliked me unilaterally. Her name is Karen, and she's 3 years younger than me, so she's 32 now. Ever since she was young, Karen just had to be the center of attention. She despised it when I, her older sister, was prioritized over her. There's a particularly vivid memory I have with Karen. It was the day Dad bought me a new dress. My favorite dress had become tattered from being worn so many times, so my father bought me a new one. It was a fresh, sunflower patterned dress. I was so happy. I thanked Dad repeatedly, and he beamed with joy. However, that happy moment was soon shattered by Karen. She came running from the other room where she was playing alone, screaming,
What's with that dress? Why did Dad buy you a dress and not me? That's so unfair.
"What are you talking about? You just got a new sweater and skirt recently." Even though I said that, Karen clearly wasn't convinced and clung to Dad, crying.
Dad, buy me a dress too, please. It's not fair that only she gets one.
Even though Dad scolded her, Karen kept wailing. Reluctantly, Dad ended up buying her a dress too. Karen always envied me, though there was no truth to her being treated any less special. Yet, she often complained about me being unfair, causing trouble for the adults around us. When we were young, adults often indulged her whims because she was the younger sister. As we grew up, she was told to endure more, but she twisted logic to get her way. She frequently belittled me, boasting that she was more loved by everyone around. Karen hated how I would calmly admonish her each time. Karen grew up spoiled and left home as soon as she went to college. Now, she lives off money given by various people, without a steady job. She's still not married. I haven't been in contact with Karen for years now, and it seems it will stay that way. The last time I saw Karen was at my wedding. She showed up in a white dress so flashy it almost overshadowed mine. Wearing a white dress to a wedding is a faux pas, which she obviously knew. She knew exactly what she was doing when she wore it. As she scoffed at my wedding dress, Karen sneered, "That doesn't suit you at all. By the way, is your face swollen? Did you even go to a bridal spa or something?" I'll never forget her face as long as I live. During the reception, she drank wine excessively, becoming very drunk and bothering several men. I haven't seen Karen since that day. I know her contact info, but have no reason to reach out. Karen doesn't visit Dad's house at all either. There were times I thought about divorcing Jake, but he is the only father Max has. I couldn't easily decide on divorce. Then one day, I got the news that Dad suddenly fell ill and was rushed to the hospital. I explained the situation to my boss and rushed to the hospital. I tried contacting Karen, but her phone was unreachable, so I sent her an email. Eventually, she replied,
Hey, is Dad dying? Well, he's old. I have a date today, so I can't go to the hospital. Let me know the time and place for the funeral.
"He isn't even confirmed to be dying yet," and to say something like that. Besides, prioritizing a date over her own parents is just unbelievable. I was stunned by Karen's insensitivity. Meanwhile, Jake also arrived at the hospital.
How is Dad's condition?
He asked, panting from rushing. "It looks very critical." "Jake, you really care about my father. Thank you." Honestly, I was surprised to see how worried Jake was about my father. They weren't on bad terms, but they hadn't been particularly close either. In the end, my father passed away. Karen never showed up at the hospital, so it was Jake and I who saw him off. Dad. As I clung to my father's lifeless body and cried, Jake also cried exaggeratedly, almost unnaturally so. Afterward, Jake helped with the funeral arrangements, and we informed Karen of the place and time. 4 days after my father died, we held the funeral, and Karen showed up with a big smile.
Long time no see, sis. Hey, let's talk about the inheritance soon.
She spoke in such a cheerful voice. It was almost as if she was humming. The fact was, our father was wealthy. Our mother had passed away when we were young, so we sisters were the only heirs. I calmly told Karen, "Today is Dad's funeral. Let's discuss the inheritance another day." Karen looked displeased, but I ignored her and went around greeting the people who had come to pay their respects. That night after the funeral, after putting Max to bed, I told Jake, "I've been thinking and I've decided to renounce the inheritance." Jake responded and shocked.
What? Are you serious?
"Keep it down. You'll wake Max. I've thought it through, and I've decided to renounce my claim." Despite my criticism, Jake became agitated and retorted,
Why would you renounce the inheritance? Don't be ridiculous. Your father had a huge fortune. It's stupid not to take it.
"Please calm down. We can't have a reasonable discussion if you're like this." Faced with Jake's furious reaction, I felt a growing distrust.
How can I not be angry? I will never accept this. Stop talking nonsense. Idiot.
His face turned red with anger, and a suspicion crossed my mind. Could it be that Jake had been after my father's wealth all along? Thinking this, I decided to confront him directly. "Jake, were you after my father's inheritance? Was your crying when he died just an act?" Jake snorted derisively and said,
Yeah, that's right. So what if it was? It was tears of joy. I was so happy that he finally died, thinking now I can become rich.
Jake's confession left me feeling so angry and disappointed that everything seemed to darken before my eyes. How could he say something so awful so calmly? To me, the man before me seemed not human, but a monster. "I see. But no matter what you say, I'm renouncing the inheritance." As I spoke quietly, Jake shouted, "You're a real fool." But my resolve did not waver. Later, I informed Karen of my decision to renounce the inheritance, and she ended up inheriting everything from our father. Once it was officially decided that Karen would inherit everything, Jake showed no interest in me anymore. He barely greeted Max and started coming home later and later. Eventually, he stopped coming home altogether.
What's happened to Dad?
"Dad is just very busy with work. You don't need to worry about anything, Max." I often reassure a worried Max. Sometime later, Jake sent me a message saying, "I need to talk tonight," so I arranged for a neighbor to look after Max. Somehow, I felt that Max shouldn't be there. That evening, Jake returned home with someone.
I'm coming in.
The voice was familiar.
Sorry for dropping by like this, big sis.
Yes, the person who came home with Jake was my sister, Karen. The moment I saw Jake's smirking face, I had a pretty good idea of what was coming. The three of us sat around the table, and Jake started talking eagerly.
So, I've decided to divorce Lori and marry Karen.
"Oh, is that because Karen inherited Dad's entire estate?" At my question, Jake burst out laughing.
What? You knew and still renounced the inheritance? You're really stupid. If you had just taken your share, none of this divorce stuff would have happened.
As I remained silent, Jake started to insult me more aggressively.
Besides being stupid enough to give up the inheritance, you're not exactly easy on the eyes either. Karen is way cuter. I was shocked at how beautiful she's become when I saw her at your father's funeral. It made me realize I had no choice but to divorce you and be with her.
It seems Jake had made a move on Karen.
Big sis, taking your husband and the inheritance from you must feel miserable, huh? Oh, it feels so good to take what's yours. I'm going to live happily with your share too.
Karen said this with a dreamy expression.
So, I'm going to remarry Karen, who inherited the entire fortune. Someone as poor as you should just disappear.
Jake said, laughing with Karen. I sighed deeply and then told them both. Fine, Jake, let's get divorced.
Oh, you're surprisingly obedient. I thought you'd cling on and beg not to divorce.
Jake seemed surprised by my response, but I felt no love left for him. Why wouldn't I want a divorce? How arrogant can you be, man? However, I will be taking custody of Max. When I announced this, Jake muttered as if he had forgotten. Oh, right.
Of course, that's fine. Having a kid around doesn't fit with the luxurious new life I'm planning with Karen. In fact, I had forgotten about Max until now. Ha! I forgot I even had a son.
What a despicable man. It was truly a good thing Max wasn't here to hear any of this. The thought of him hearing these words made my spine chill. I restrained myself from shouting at Jake and calmly told him, I will be contacting a lawyer for alimony and child support later.
What? If you wanted money, why did you renounce the inheritance?
Jake laughed mockingly.
Really, big sis, you make no sense.
Karen leaned on Jake, laughing scornfully.
Well, a few $100,000 is nothing to us now. We'll have your father's vast fortune rolling in.
Don't forget what you just said. Now, did you bring the divorce papers? When I asked, Jake exclaimed, right, and pulled the divorce papers out of his bag.
I filled out my part, so just sign your part quickly.
Understood. I filled out my section and handed it back to Jake.
All right, this makes our divorce official.
Thanks, big sis. But really, you're plain looking and 35, already divorced. Remarriage is probably impossible for you now.
Exactly. Just like Karen said, your life's going to be hell from now on. What a miserable old lady.
Facing the two of them laughing hysterically, I responded with a firm attitude. The conversation is over. I'm going to pick up Max now. Can you two make sure not to come back to this house until I'm ready to leave? After saying that, I went to pick up Max from a friend's house. As soon as Max saw me, he ran up with a big smile, shouting, "Mommy," and jumped into my arms. His cuteness almost made me cry, compounded by the stress I had just endured. I thanked my friend and handed her some desserts as a gift I had bought earlier. She seemed to sense that something serious had happened and showed concern.
Lori, you look pale. Are you okay? Remember, you can always rely on me.
Moved by my friend's kindness, I felt tears welling up again. After thanking my friend repeatedly, Max and I left her house. As we walked through the night, hand in hand, Max happily sang a little tune and swung my hand back and forth. Perhaps my emotions were a bit out of whack as tears rimmed my eyes. This was no time for tears. After all, I had no reason to cry. The ones who will see hell aren't me, but those two. I decided this would be the last time I cry. From now on, Max and I will walk a happy path together. When Max and I got home, Jake and Karen were already gone. I immediately started looking for a new place to live, scouted some options online, and then went to a real estate agency to finalize the contract. I was fortunate to find just the right property within Max's elementary school district. I wanted to keep Max's environment as stable as possible, so I specifically looked for homes within his school district. Having finished preparing for the move, I left the house with Max. Later, through my lawyer, I demanded alimony and child support from Jake. I also demanded alimony from Karen. but perhaps emboldened by the inheritance. Both of them paid the amounts in full. With that money, I secured a stable life foundation for Max and me to start our new lives. Max really liked our new home and adjusted well to the divorce.
All I need is you, Mom.
He said with a smile. Jake had only taken care of Max until he was 1 year old, and after that, their interactions were minimal. After I declared my renunciation of the inheritance, he became even more indifferent in his behavior. So for Max, it might have felt like it didn't matter whether his father was there or not. I resolved to make Max's life even happier than before. Fortunately, I had a job, and with the alimony and child support from Jake and Karen, I had little to worry about financially. Max and I were enjoying a peaceful, fun life. 3 months after the divorce, Jake suddenly called. However, I was at work at the time and hadn't noticed the call as my smartphone was in my bag. After work, when I checked my phone, I realized Jake had called. There were numerous missed calls. The voicemail he left sounded desperate.
Call me back urgently.
I scoffed and muttered, "Finally noticed, huh?" Without bothering to call back, I put my phone back in my bag and headed home. On the train, Jake kept calling, annoying me enough to turn off my phone. After picking up Max from after-school care and having dinner together at home, I had completely forgotten about Jake's calls. As we ate, Max happily told me about his day at school. Listening to him was my greatest joy. After cleaning up from dinner, I remembered I had turned off my phone. When I turned it back on, Jake immediately called again. I considered ignoring it, but was curious about their situation, so I decided to answer. Fortunately, Max was in another room doing homework, so he wouldn't hear the call. "Hello."
Hey, I've been calling you. I even left a voicemail. Why didn't you answer until now?
Jake sounded furious, his voice almost breaking. "Calm down. Let's talk more calmly. What do you want?" I had an idea of what he might want, but I pretended not to know and asked him.
You knew, didn't you, that your father-in-law had a huge debt?
When Jake said exactly what I expected, I couldn't help but smile.
What are you laughing at? You knew, didn't you? That's why you renounced the inheritance, right?
Yes, indeed, my father had more debts than assets. He had fallen victim to a real estate investment scam, leaving him in debt. It was a deal brought to him by a longtime friend, and my father, without any doubt, went along with it. Inheriting my father's estate meant inheriting his debts as well. That's why I renounced the inheritance. Yes, that's right. I knew about my father's debts. But saying I deceived you sounds so malicious.
So I was right. You deceived us. You never mentioned the debts to me and Karen.
Jake was so angry I thought his veins might burst. When I told you I was renouncing my father's inheritance, I tried to explain about the debts too. But you just shouted me down and wouldn't listen. I told him calmly, contrasting Jake's fury.
What? Are you trying to say this is my fault?
By all accounts, it is your fault. At my words, Jake started yelling even more. However, after a while, he sneered condescendingly.
But you know, things aren't going to go your way. You wanted to make us suffer, but we'll renounce the inheritance too. Luckily, we figured it out in time.
What? Caught off guard by Jake's grand misunderstanding, I couldn't help but blurt out a dumbfounded response.
Don't what me. I'm telling you, we're renouncing the inheritance too.
That's not possible.
What?
This time it was Jake who sounded baffled. You can't. It's been 3 months since the inheritance passed on. You can't renounce it now. Besides, you've already touched the inheritance, so you couldn't renounce it even if it hadn't been 3 months.
No, that can't be.
Jake's voice trembled. It's true. You can check for yourself. And tell Karen, too, that renouncing the inheritance is no longer possible.
No, no, no. If we can't renounce the inheritance, what are we going to do? We'll be drowned in debt.
Yes, that's true. But it's no longer my concern, so I'm going to hang up now. I said this and ended the call. As expected, Jake and Karen ended up burdened with massive debts and struggled with their payments. 3 months had passed. It was Sunday, and Max and I spent the morning making a lot of pancakes with various toppings for a slightly luxurious breakfast. Then my phone rang. It was Karen calling. I thought about ignoring it, but figured she would just keep calling, so I decided to answer. However, I didn't want Max to overhear the conversation. So I told him, Mommy's going to take a call, eat up, and move to another room before answering.
Lori, help me.
Karen blurted out as soon as I answered. Despite her plea, there was no way I was going to help Karen. But first, I decided to ask about the current situation. What happened?
It's horrible. Jake is trying to leave me. He wants to divorce me. I said I didn't want to, but he insists on divorcing. Isn't he the worst?
According to Karen, she and Jake were now in divorce proceedings. This debt was due to the inherited estate, and Jake was trying to escape it by divorcing her.
It's awful, right? I never thought Jake would be such a person. To just discard me like this.
No, you clearly said he married you for the inheritance you got, and he was a low man from the start, right? You married him to look down on me, right? It's your own doing. As I spoke calmly, Karen yelled back through tears.
What kind of way is that to talk? You're always like this. Ever since we were kids, you always come at me with the right reasons. You always look at me with those cold eyes. I hate you.
Yes, I hate you too. Whether you're in the middle of a divorce with your husband or struggling with debt, it has nothing to do with me, so I'm going to hang up now. Startled, Karen shouted.
Wait, I'm sorry I said I hated you. Come on, we're sisters, you have to help me. Please give me back the alimony.
Give back the alimony? There's no way I would do that. There's nothing I can do for you. I answered in dismay.
That's not true. You can give me money, right? Please, $30,000. No, even $20,000 would be enough. Just give me some money.
I refuse. Why don't you ask Jake? Goodbye. With that, I ended the call. Later, I learned that the stocks included in my father's estate had crashed, increasing the net debt even more. Karen kept calling me, so I eventually blocked her number. Months later, Max and I continued to live a peaceful life, having completely forgotten about Karen and Jake. One day, I remembered them and became curious about their situation, so I hired a private investigator. The investigation revealed that Karen and Jake's divorce had been finalized. After the divorce, Karen was juggling day and night jobs, barely managing her debt payments. However, even though she was still beautiful, being older made it difficult for her to attract clients in the nightlife scene. The men who used to lavish her with gifts had all left after finding out about her massive debt. One of them, feeling threatened, had even confessed to his wife about his affair with Karen. Most of Karen's benefactors were much older married men. When their wives learned of the affairs, they sued Karen for damages, further increasing her debts. Someone I knew saw Karen in the nightlife district, desperately trying to attract customers in the cold wearing a cheap dress.
Hey, mister, won't you have a drink?
She would ask every man, but no one paid her any attention, worn out and haggard as she looked. Eventually, an office worker she was pestering snapped, "Lady, you're too persistent." and went into a club with a younger, prettier woman. Karen watched this and broke down crying. Even after hearing this, I felt no sympathy for Karen. It was all her own doing. Meanwhile, after divorcing Karen, Jake had fallen prey to another bad woman and ended up burdened with even more debt, unable to escape. To pay off his debts, Jake had started working a second job in addition to his main employment. Despite not being young anymore, he worked like a horse, but since his primary employer had a strict no moonlighting policy, he was eventually caught and fired. He was now considering bankruptcy. Reading the private investigator's report, I smiled at the fitting end to such a despicable man's story. In contrast, I continued to live peacefully with Max. We even got a dog recently, turning us into a family of 3. My job was going well, and I had just been promoted. Work and home life were both thriving, and I was living happily.